Kirsten Lovett, shamanic coach here from Now Moment Journey podcast, and I wanted to talk to you today. And first of all, welcome you, and also talk to you a little bit today. Since I'll let you know what day it is today. It's actually October 31st. By the time you listen to this, it'll be well after that. But I wanted to talk to you because the veils are thinner today. Whether you are aware of calendrical or folklore, or you might be interested in the Wheel of the Year, but this is a time of year from October 31st to November 2nd where you might hear people say the veils are thinner. And what they mean by that usually is like it's a little bit more conducive to being able to speak to or listen or hear the spirits. And of course, that's a whole, that could be a whole podcast in itself. What does that mean? But I kind of wanted to talk a little bit today about kind of why I'm in this, what I call business, at least of shamanic coaching right now, and what does that really mean, at least for me, and how I view it for other people that come into, who I come into contact with. It's a kind of mixture of different experiences and traditions. But I want to always come back to one idea, which is no matter what I talk about in this podcast, I hope that everybody knows that I believe that every single person on this earth, no matter what their background is or what their knowledge is or what their experience is with either what we would call indigenous traditions or folklore traditions or people who we would associate with, honoring the earth in a spiritual way. I believe that everyone, no matter where we come from, where we're living, more importantly, deserves to have a relationship with the earth. And why is that important? Well, there's so many reasons. I'll give you one reason that's very practical. Right now, I haven't solved this problem yet. I've solved other problems, but not this one. Right now, I'm having a little bit of trouble sleeping, and I know some of it is due to some things having to do with how much caffeine I take in or whatever. And that's sure. We can kind of utilize our knowledge of medical, things to kind of figure that out or talk to our doctors and various people. But because I am a multidimensional person, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably maybe are aware that you're a multidimensional person too. But that means that a variety of different, shall we say, levels of experience or levels of consciousness or different kinds of frequencies or different kinds of, even when we're asleep at night, different kinds of energies affect my ability to kind of maintain kind of equilibrium or, get a good night's sleep. I'll give you a more specific example because that's kind of a vague description. But for example, if there's unhappiness in what some call the astral plane, or if there's unhappiness in my neighborhood, not amongst people, there could be unhappiness amongst people. That's always a possibility. But I think sometimes there's also things in the astral plane where it's like maybe things that are being done to the earth that are disrupting the equilibrium of the earth. And what I mean by that is, like, if you are familiar with, like, for example, old folklore from from Ireland, for example, or Scotland, or the, even England. I'll just use Ireland as an example, but there's actual clips that I can find YouTubes of that my sister Marissa has found at our Facebook group, by the way, which is a free Facebook called Animistic Earth Medicine. We also run a Patreon too called Shamanic Earth Medicine. But anyway, one time she shared a clip at the free group about this, I think it was footage from the 1960s from some villagers in Ireland, and they were talking about whether the beliefs of tearing down trees in certain areas of their village, was that still kind of considered taboo or like something you shouldn't do because the fairies would disrupt your home life or disrupt the village. And of course, for various reasons, we all know that, in the real world, quote unquote, people don't believe in fairies, or people don't believe in spirits, or people don't believe in, not necessarily ghosts. I mean, they're not always ghosts that are that are malicious or whatever. Sometimes spirits are just kind of confused beings that need to be somewhere else, or sometimes they're just kind of like clutter, that just needs to be kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say moved somewhere else because that makes it sound like you're controlling everything. But, there's certain processes. Anyway, my point is with this Ireland clip, that even in the 1960s, there was a small group of people in this video clip where they were saying, yeah, I don't know where this belief comes from, or maybe I do, but I don't consider myself a person that follows beliefs like this, but I do know that there has been cases where if you cut down this certain kind of tree, trouble happens, maybe for that person who lives there, or maybe people in the area or whatever. And that's just an example of cutting down a tree. And it's usually a certain kind of tree, like an elder tree or something like that, or sometimes it's a yew or something like that. But that's just Ireland, that's just one country. And there's plenty of other beliefs like that. I'm using this as, that's like a practical application of where you can see the string of events of a person, whether they do or don't believe in, quote unquote, it doesn't just have to be fairies. It could be anything outside of 3D, three-dimensional reality, which is what people call the real world, right? You could be a person who has had experiences with, and I know this is on October 31st, and I should be talking about spooky experiences, but they can go both ways. They can be either unpleasant experiences that, you'd maybe rather not have, to traumatic experiences that are absolutely horrible, to lovely experiences, which I mostly prefer to talk about because I think those are the kinds of experiences that really can heal people in the here and now, in the 21st century, in this very high-tech, I like technology, but there's a balance that has to happen between this disconnected way we live from our environment and, and technology, and also to being connected to our environment in a way that's really very ancient. Those seem like polar opposites, and sometimes they are, but my point is that some of these things can be very practical, where something that seems woo-woo, that's a very popular turn of phrase, woo-woo, new age, back in the old days they would have called it folklore, and back before that it was just reality, because whether superstition was kind of popular or not, people believed these things affected other things. You destroy the environment in your local area, something happens that isn't very happy in that area. That's a very practical thing to think about, okay? So, like, if you're in that village, and you don't have to be in Ireland, you could be here in the United States, where something happens, like, I'll go back to myself, what I was talking about. Something happens in my neighborhood, or maybe it's not even my neighborhood, it could just be something that I'm connected to, like, I'm very, for example, connected to the water, so I tend to pick up things. When I say pick up, I mean I pick up on, like I sense them. If there's unhappiness with our local water, maybe like the Gulf of Mexico, or maybe a river nearby or something like that, I tend to pick up on that. So my health and my ability to sleep is affected by, these things happening in my environment. So, and I know I'm not the only person this happens to, and it could happen in different ways. Maybe it doesn't happen in your sleep cycle. Maybe it happens, it can happen. That's not the only place it happens to me, by the way. It's just one of many places. So then it becomes tantamount to the point where you're like, okay, this is actually affecting my physical health, or maybe it's affecting your emotional health, or maybe it's affecting your mental health, or some other part of you. And then you as a human being, I'll say it's me, but I know I'm not the only person this happens to. So you become kind of motivated to like solve the problem, right? So you go, well, all right, maybe I'm going to drink less coffee today and see if that does anything. So you try to drink less coffee, you're still having problems, or maybe you take melatonin and, that works great for a while, but maybe there's some weird thing that happens still again. What I'm saying is once you put in all these other things that, maybe you take, chamomile or some other kinds of, whatever they are. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. This is not, medical advice I'm giving anybody, okay? But I'm just saying you would go to your doctor and you might say, I'm having trouble sleeping, and let's say things are going great for a while and your sleep cycle gets better, but maybe you have a dream or two about something that maybe you're sleeping okay at this point, but there's something kind of unsettling about it. Or maybe you just have some kind of sense that something's off, Sometimes that's the earth or the, elements, whether it's water or, sometimes it's fire, sometimes it's ether, sometimes it's air or wind. Some people are very connected to the wind, But, or maybe it could be an ancestor. And since today is kind of a 3-day period of ancestors, I would like to bring this exploration. And by the way, if you've been listening so far, you will notice that I do channel a lot of these podcasts. So that's why it tends to be kind of a stream of consciousness style. So let's talk about the ancestors. So, you've probably heard about, like, we go back to this fairy example, or your local area is, maybe having a lot of construction, or there's some kind of disruption in it could even be just generalized disruption. Maybe it's nowhere near your house, but you're just picking up on it. Well, what people back in the olden days did is, and I didn't know this, obviously, until I started studying and practicing certain traditions that are associated with indigenous people. And sometimes you have to go through the back door to learn these things as a person who didn't grow up with these traditions. But one of the things that I think is fairly widespread globally, and I like to talk about these widespread global either modes of practice or ritual or things like that are found in some way in a lot of ancient traditions, including Europe. And that thing is offerings. For example, offerings are very, you could probably go to um, any ancient culture that's still practicing its traditional wisdom today, which is, we tend to associate that with the indigenous cultures of various continents and various places. But there are some cases where you can experience like maybe folklore that has survived, which is pretty remarkable. It's remarkable across the board, all of the indigenous traditions that have managed to keep their traditions in spite of like just massive, destruction of culture and people, obviously, and just loss of life as well as loss of you know the tight knitness of ancestral wisdom that's supposed to get carried down from generation to generation. That is not exclusively an indigenous thing. We see it in the indigenous peoples, in the peoples of, in the mountain peoples of, of the Himalayas or the Andes, or, people in the Philippines, or people in the, there's so many places I could, indigenous Australians, Native Americans in northern Native America, South America and the Amazon jungle, and I could go on and on and on. And there's places, plenty of places in Europe as well that, Asia, Mongolia, Japan, just tons of places. And also a few in Europe, and it's very hard to find, but again, there's a base of offerings, and what I mean by that is something, this is a hard thing to define, but because it can come in many different forms, but it's like an action that you take in the present moment that gives to either a being or an ancestor or a spirit or a deity, or it could just be an element. A spirit can be many things. A spirit is not just, a ghost or something. A spirit can mean a local nature spirit that's protecting your home, or it can mean a water spirit, or it can mean a specific ancestral spirit that looks over your ancestral line, or it can mean, I haven't even mentioned a couple other things. So a lot of stuff. It can mean a lot of things, right? And a spirit could also mean something undesirable that you would rather not have in your general area. So you have to be kind of specific about what you're saying. But let's say you want to play it safe, which I always think is a great idea when it comes to learning these things. And you say to yourself, okay, it's October 31st, or it's November 1st, or it's November 2nd, and please don't be like discouraged if it's not one of those days. Any day is a good day to start doing this. But you could just take some rice and, and just offer it to the ancestral helpers on your mother's line. And if you feel connected to the Nordic tradition, you could say the Disir, and that would be the female. It's a much broader term than that, but you could say Hail Disir, and you could give them, maybe not rice in that case, maybe you would give them some cream or some butter or something like that. And today, actually, would be the Alfar, which is also sounds a lot like elves, and that would be the male. There's Disir and Alfar. And Alfar is, you might hear people talking about Alpha Bloat, which is like an offering or a sacrifice. And that word sacrifice is, in this case, since we're not actually talking about blood, we're talking about like, you could use some kind of, we like to use kombucha, or if you you have mead, that's great, or ale or something like that. I know a lot of people like to grow their own mead, but we use kombucha, which is, has a little bit of alcohol in it. And you could offer just a, small amount to the alfar, and that would represent the male line of your ancestors. There's candles that you could offer. There's, I think food probably would be good for this time of year. And as we go into the November months and December and January, especially if you're, if you take a liking to any Northern European or, for example, Nordic animism things, you might want to, think about saving some of the food that you make for your dinner, especially like the breads and sweets and stuff like that. Just using a portion of that for offerings for Yule, or Yule, if you will. So you'll see what I'm using here is an example to talk about, for example, Northern European stuff. But I could just as easily, if I was, I've been initiated into one particular group of indigenous peoples, and I've received transmissions from another group of indigenous peoples. But I feel a little more comfortable talking about, not that I believe that everybody has to just talk about the people they're, genetically related to. I just feel a little bit better talking about the Northern European, because I feel like we meaning people of European descent, we've been told a lot, because it's true, that we're the colonizers. And yeah, the people before us, and there's still people right now who colonize who are of European descent. But what people don't talk about enough is, and I think it would really help people of European descent, and that could be anybody. You could be, any mixture of that sort of thing, is before colonization, and before, and even after colonization, when we first came to, I should say I'm somebody who lives in the United States, but when people from Europe came over to the United States, there was a little bit of these folklore things. Obviously, they were stamped out during the Salem witch trials and other things, and then just, and there's actually records of people not being allowed to practice certain kinds of activities that I'm talking to you about, like leaving butter out for the geese or something. It's not specifically about that specific tradition, but there's a reason why, people in America are discouraged from doing this work. But here's the thing. When you do this work, and when you send a message out to the ancestors, because you're not just talking about the people you've lost in your lifetime. I can say this from my own personal experience. The word ancestor, it's like got many meanings. And sure, it can mean the recently departed, recently as in your own lifetime, and those are very special people, of course. But it also means people who they descended from, like, people from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that you might be able to get to know on a spirit level. It's complicated. I'm not saying it's easy at all, but it's very beneficial, and sometimes it's really very comforting to have kind of a, shall we say, telephone line that you can connect to these people if you need to, and the more crazy, and I don't know, crazy is a very judgmental word, the more unpredictable and the more kind of unsettled things become in the world that we live in, which maybe is a good thing. Sometimes it is, not all the time. It can be hard to kind of navigate through change, just general change, and sometimes having a way to communicate to your, not just your ancestors, but a broader network of spirits that the ancestors personally are personally invested in you. So that's where it helps to be able to connect to them. It's a kind of complicated process, but I'm talking about offerings today because the offering is what really sends out the message to the spirits. And believe me, I've seen it work not only in my life but in other people's lives. People that I've worked with, people that just both for myself and others. It's how that happens is going to kind of vary in terms of like what's comfortable for you or what you take to. And while I'm on that subject, I would like to kind of segue a little bit into, because this is related. Before I was telling you about how a lot of cultures worldwide, whether they're indigenous or traditional or whatever, and still functioning today, or maybe they're being revived in a healthy way, they use offerings, and that's what we've been talking about. Well, there's other things that they're going to look different from culture to culture because, different landscapes are, different no matter where you go. A mountainous landscape versus, a water-based landscape, or etc., depending on geography. But a lot of these traditional cultures, once you start practicing some of their, either maybe some people would call them medicine ways or old ways, or sometimes it's shamanism or sometimes it's animism. But the real impetus behind it is to live in harmony with the earth. Because, and if you want to look at it as like a selfish thing to do, it's because your life gets better if you're in harmony with the earth. And that's a pretty big statement to make because, like, the entire culture we live in is so out of harmony with the earth. It's very hard for a single person to make that happen. But it is possible to kind of keep it up. So how does that tie in with what I'm getting at with common threads? I'd say offerings is one of them. And then related to a quiz that I've been recently talking about in the podcast, which is actually an ongoing quiz that I've revamped. And this is the first kind of finished product. And it's, are you an animal or plant or stone spirit archetype? And so why I'm bringing this up in reference to offerings is, like offerings being found in many, many different places around the world, these kinds of archetypes, and I don't want to, when I say the word archetype, I don't want people to think that I'm being derogatory towards any kind of, I'm just using it as kind of a catch-all term. It's not meant with any disrespect, okay? But like an animal spirit archetype, for example, when you think of the Amazon, you tend to think of certain key animals that live in the Amazon. Or at least that's what comes to my mind. And I've never been to the Amazon. I've been to Peru, but I haven't been to the Amazon yet. Maybe I'll go someday. But, or when you think of the mountains, even just in Scotland, I think of sheep or goats or something like that. And so in those areas, perhaps those key animals might have some kind of ancient connection to spirits of the land in that area. And if you descend from that, and I'm making this I don't believe that you have to stick to whatever your genetic makeup is. You can definitely learn from a trusted professional, a tradition, especially if it's connected to somebody who's studied with indigenous people, who learns a very traditional way of teaching. You can definitely, learn this stuff. But I'm just saying, if you just happen to want to like hang out in your own like, background or whatever, animal spirits definitely you can say that's fairly widespread. Plant spirits also widespread. A lot of people don't know this, including myself until recently. Um, Psychoactive plant spirits were used even in Europe in ancient times. Especially as we get into the winter months, you might hear me talk again about the fly agaric mushroom and how that's associated with Ellen the reindeer. Well, Ellen is the more recent name of it, but like the ancient deer, or I should say red deer, it's really more associated with the red deer or the deer, especially from the ancient deer tracks from like 10,000 years ago in England. That's a whole other story. And actually, if you're interested in that, you can go to my YouTube channel, Now Moment Journey, and I've got a YouTube from a few years ago that I did on Ellen of the Ways. So if you're interested in that, and I might talk about that again. So that's an animal spirit. Oh, plant spirit as well. And then stone spirits. Well, Stonehenge is the most famous example. The spirits that are associated with the healing Preseli stones, which for those of you who need some kind of research to back this up, I can tell you that both Timothy Darville, who's a faculty professor at Bournemouth University, and then Mike Parker Pearson, who is the archaeology, I don't know if he's emeritus, but he's on staff at the English Heritage Foundation. He's associated with Stonehenge in terms of research. They both determined in one way, shape, or another that the Preseli stones, which are from Wales, and they were moved all the way over to Avebury, I believe is where Stonehenge is, that those were used for healing. Now those came later. The old triptych stones that are up there. I'm not saying that word right, but the ones that we know really well, the from all the iconic pictures, those are the oldest stones. But the ones that are in the middle are they're from Preseli, which is an area in Wales, and they were believed to have healing properties. And I think they have kind of a bluish tinge to them. And basically, Stonehenge was celebrated during its time as being a place for the dead, but also, or to honor the dead in winter. So we know that people came from far and wide in the Neolithic it would be, to go to these places, these stone circles, to honor the dead or the ancestors, or people passed on that the family and the ancient family as well. So I would definitely call that stone spirits. And certainly that's not exclusive to England. We can see that stones being used in, I have yet to not see a stone pop up. Every time I read about a different healing tribe, like in Mexico, or if I hear about a tribe in Nepal, and it doesn't even have to be a tribe, it can just be a group of shamanic healers, or they're usually called something else in that specific tribe. Whether if it's in Peru, they'd be called a Paco. In Mexico, they tend to be called a curandero or curandera. I mean, it could be, whatever the local term is. But you tend to see a stone in there, or stones, when they heal. You also tend to see, not just in those two places, I'm talking about all around the world, you tend to see a plant, usually, especially if the geographic landscape that this place is, wherever we're talking about, is conducive to lots of plant life in general. Obviously, places like in the jungle are going to be more conducive to that. But even plant life in places where there wouldn't be a ton of, maybe there's just trees and not much there, but there's usually at least one or two plants that they might use for herbs or whatever for, again, curative healing. Not just physical ailments, but spiritual ailments that become physical ailments. Because that's usually how they roll, you know? They meaning a lot of shamanic healers worldwide, right? And then, of course, animal spirits. This you really see, especially with shamanic trance work. Like, you don't have to be wearing a mask or horns or whatever, but you tend to see, and I guess I'm thinking more about the deer because I just mentioned it, but there's the famous deer horns that are still, I think, in a museum somewhere in Starcar on the north, I believe that's the northeast side of England, and that's from like 8,000 years ago. And they believe, I think, that those deer horns were used, and it's basically an old, skull or, deer antlers, were used during shamanic trance work. I'm sure it would have been called something else back then, but you know what I mean. So, and that's where you go into an altered state of consciousness, which has now been revived, in the last 50 to 100 years. And it's, now they call it core shamanism. But what's interesting about it is all this stuff is kind of like things that have been, quote unquote, revived, are basically based on ideas or concepts that people did like 8,000 years ago or more, even longer. So that would be like an animal spirit, like the deer spirit, the man or woman healer who maybe wears, and I'm not saying they have to wear these things. You can just as easily not, you don't have to be wearing something like that. But when you do trance work, eventually, like especially shamanic trance work, you eventually want to consider, having an animal spirit ally, or plant spirit, or stone spirit, or all of the above. And there's a number of other, I guess you could call them a spirit team or your posse or whatever. Because, if you decide to do that kind of work, and it can be even on a real kind of mild level, like even if you just want to do kind of like low-key trance work in order to kind of navigate to see where your interests are, if you do want to be a healer of some type, or you could want to just make your life better, and not even be interested in healing other people. Maybe you want to work with the elements, or maybe you want to help people by helping them engage with their environment, which is kind of something that I end up coming back to myself. I love helping people, but I tend to kind of, instead of directly healing them, I like showing them ways that they can engage with the environment, because that's how I got healed. I mean, I have received a lot of healing, and I'm so lucky to receive healing from actual people, and that's involves them engaging with their helping spirits, and that's amazing. And I will always, I mean, who wouldn't like that, right? But I also really, really love, finding ways for people to engage with animal spirits or plant spirits or stone spirits. Sometimes you hear me talk about tobacco, excuse me, and that's an example of a plant spirit. So the reason I bring that up in reference to offerings is you will find worldwide that many, many different cultures have those things in them: animal spirits, plant spirits, stone spirits. So this quiz that, I would love for you to take to see, and it's a whatever results you get, it could change, the next time you take it, So don't think it's like an absolute quiz in terms of like, this is what you're going to be forever and ever and ever. But it will give you an idea of like the kinds of things you might be interested in if you decide you want to get into, maybe you want to learn more about plant spirits, or maybe you want to learn more about how they can help you in your personal life, or how they can help you relate to your environment. Maybe you're also having similar symptoms that I had, Maybe you're just wanting to like have a better relationship with, certain kinds of plant spirits. If you're somebody who used to smoke or is trying to quit, if you want to learn about that. Or maybe you want to learn about your ancestors. I feel like if you take this quiz and you find out which things are kind of interesting to you, that it might help you find out what you had in common and have in common with your ancient ancestors from thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, who are really well and healed. And that, when I say that, I'm not saying that all ancestors are well and healed from thousands of years ago, but sometimes the ones from a long time ago are more connected to that way of living because they had to live that way. They had to stay in contact with their environment all the time. It was their survival. And so, sometimes you can manage to connect to that, kind of ancestor. And that can be a really beneficial thing for you, both in your personal life and, depending on if you decide maybe you're already into healing, this could be something, or maybe you're a tarot reader, or maybe you're a medium, or maybe you're just somebody who like has a lot of sensitivities and just wants to like kind of get a little bit more in equilibrium, by utilizing these different kinds of energies. Because what people call woo-woo right now, well, I hate to say this, but there's a reason why a lot of people are getting into woo-woo things. And I mentioned this in our last podcast before I wrap it up. The reason why people go to woo-woo things is because our society is failing us. And it hasn't just been failing us in, the last 40 years or 50 years. It's never really worked for everybody anyway. God knows, a long time, right? So these other ways, they're not like replacements, but think of it as like complementary medicine, basically. It's just something that can help it could maybe provide solace to you. Maybe it makes you feel a little less alone, If there's one thing about the real world, when people say the hard, cruel, real world, is that, when I first started having these experiences, especially the really intense ones about 15 years ago in 2007, I think the first thing I wanted to tell people about, that I still feel reluctant to tell people about, is that we're not alone. And I don't mean that like aliens or whatever. I mean, there's nature energies literally outside. I'm looking out my window right now and I'm seeing these beautiful plants and trees. And I know that there's energies out there that are really loving and wonderful. And wouldn't you want to know that? Wouldn't you want people to know that? And to know that they're not, meant to just exist in the cold, hard, cruel world. I mean, that's just a bottom line nice thing to know. So, yeah, I'd really love for you to, I'll leave the link for the quiz. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't get it to the point where there's a kind of next steps, which I probably need to do. I'd rather give you this quiz and like let you kind of take it and just, maybe if you feel like giving me feedback, you can always give me feedback. There's a way to do that if you're listening on the podcast. I think you can write questions in on, the various podcast channels that you're listening to. But you can also find me at Instagram at Now Moment Journey. You can find me, on Facebook, same page name, Now Moment Journey. I'm at YouTube, same name. And I usually list all this in the details. And yeah, you can always just get back to me and be like, well, I liked your quiz, but I have questions, or or I don't get it, or whatever. You can just let me know, what vibes with you, what doesn't vibe with you. Because I think what's missing with it, and I'll be upfront with you in a little bit, maybe too much information, but is kind of a next step. So maybe I'll get that together for you and have that for you. I don't know how long it will take, but it's something I'd like to think about. And while I'm telling you things that I'm thinking about in the future, I can definitely see another quiz coming up that would be maybe centered around sound and music, uh, either or, and maybe water, and I'm trying to think of one other um, topic, because I feel like those are things that people are very drawn to, that are also very commonly, I hate to use the word common, but prevalent. They're prevalent. That's a less derogatory word. They're prevalent throughout many, 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 many traditional cultures. So, definitely sound and water. Um, so I hope that you can kind of see where I'm coming from with this, is that I'm trying to kind of, from maybe a math perspective, choose some common denominators, or patterns that are found in many, many cultures, so that no matter who takes this quiz, or just listens to my podcast, or just is interested in what I'm talking about, knows that these aren't specific to just one small group of people found in, one area, you know. I'm sure I managed to say something that wasn't complete, or was maybe not as clear. So maybe you can just give me some comments on the podcast if you like. I think there's also a link where you can send in a question, so you can always send me a question too. So thanks for listening today, and I hope that you have, as on the date of recording, it is both Samhain and All Hallows Eve and Dia de los Muertos. Among, there could be some other traditions I obviously am not aware of that are celebrated during this October 31st day. But these next 2 or 3 days are very special across the world, because they do represent a time to think of those who came before us in a very positive light, and to remember them in a positive way, that they came before us so that we could, make the world, I hate to say this, a better place. It's a wonderful thing to say, but it's been overused. But to truly make this world a better place for everybody, and to know that we're in communion with the plants and the animals and the water and the stones and just the myriad of different natural forces that are out there right now, always waiting for us to talk with them and listen to them, and also talk to them. And so I thank you for listening today, and I will definitely be back very soon. Oh, and I did want to mention also, if you would like to, I did mention the shamanic journeying and also talking about the deer and whatnot. If you're interested, I have a Patreon with my sister Marissa Lovett, Celestial Tree. It's called Shamanic Earth Medicine, and it's at www.patreon.com/Shamanic Earth Medicine. And there's several different tiers that you can join at. You can join as low as $1 a month. That'll give you one video per month. Usually it ends up being at least 2 videos, or two, one video from one of us and maybe a podcast from me or whatever. But you're basically getting two for one, because it's 2 of us at the Patreon. So you're always getting what we're both doing. And For example, this month, for the $5 a month people and the $15 a month people, I will be doing a shamanic journey to the spirit of the deer. And that allows you to basically go into a trance state. It's very safe. Just don't do it while you're driving. Don't be operating machinery while you're, never, ever, ever meditate while you're driving. Just as a rule of thumb. I don't care who tells you otherwise. Just don't do it. Just wait until you're, pull your car to the side of the road in a safe place, or wait until you get home, and then you do things like meditation and trance work and things like that. So long story short, we go into a shamanic journey trance state, and I don't want to give it away, but basically you end up meeting up with the spirit of the deer, and it's a very profound experience to have this trance state experience. Every time, it's kind of like jazz. Every time we do it, it's different, and I think it's usually very healing. I've heard it be healing for other people as well. So, and it's something we can do together. It's a Zoom ceremony thing, so we meet up via Zoom, and we tend to do them on like around 12, in the afternoon, Eastern time. But sometimes the times are slightly different. And you can always watch the replay too. But that's just an example of one of the many things we do at the Patreon. That's not the only thing we do, but that's one of many things we do. So if that sounds interesting to you, that's going to be in late November. I'll announce the date later on. But if you'd like to do that, just come to the patreon.com/shamanic earth medicine, and you would get that if you sign up for $5 a month. So it's a monthly subscription type thing. And we do a ceremony every month, and they're different. Different kinds of ceremonies. And both Marissa and I alternate in terms of doing these ceremonies. So, yeah, that's just one of many things we do. And if that sounds fun or interesting, you can always ask me a question about it if you have more questions. And I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a wonderful Samhain, All Hallows Eve, and Dia de los Muertos, and blessings to you.